My name is Carlton James Randall, although at school the name sounded too formal and long, so the kids quickly started calling me just Carl, and by high school I became CJ, somehow more appropriate for a teenager who was always the center of attention. But the real nickname that stuck with me for many years came when I joined the football team. From then on they called me Big C, and this nickname was not accidental. At 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 260 pounds, I always stood out from my peers, the guy that people looked up to. In school photographs, I always stood in the last row, towering over everyone like a tower. At that time, I was one of the largest players in our defensive line, and when the opponents saw me on the field, their expressions changed dramatically, from confidence to hidden anxiety. But it was not only my impressive dimensions that made me the center of attention, although this, of course, played a role. In the world of high school football, I was a giant, but compared to the guys who played at the top college levels, I was far from the biggest. In fact, among the players at my position at top colleges, there were guys just as big, and sometimes even bigger. But the reason college coaches and scouts were literally competing to recruit me was not because of my size. It was all about my ability to move in a way that no one would expect from a person of my size. Despite being 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing an impressive 260 pounds, I was so fast that it felt like I had a rocket attached to my butt. There were moments on the field when my opponents simply couldn't believe how lightning fast I was breaking through the line, as if I had an extra engine hidden somewhere inside. No one expected such speed and agility from a man my size, and that was what made me a fearsome weapon. My sophomore year in college, I led the conference in tackles made, forced fumbles, and tackles. My statistics were impressive and scared not only the players, but also the coaches of other teams. Half the quarterbacks in our conference were afraid to even take the field if they knew I was going to play against them. They prepared for the game in advance as if their main task was simply to survive. And for the attackers of the opposing teams, my appearances in the game became a real test. By the middle of the match, they were no longer fighting so much as pretending that they were trying to do something. It was as if their efforts were simply an attempt to avoid complete humiliation, because they understood perfectly well that our defensive line would break through anyway. I was rarely left out of double protection. There were almost always two lines trying to hold me back, but even that rarely worked. I was too fast, too powerful, and too determined. My aggression and speed on the field made me a nightmare for any team trying to get past our defense. Now you're probably wondering, why haven't I heard of him? What team does he play for? Let me help you. I play for the Provincial Insurance Company. When you see those commercials on television where they tell you to buy part of the block, that's us. Now I am the financial director of the company. All the accountants of Provincial, all over the world, report to me. You see, I suffered a career-ending knee injury early in my third year and could no longer play football. I studied hard, earned degrees in accounting and international finance, and never looked back. Although, maybe from time to time I miss those glory days when the Super Bowl comes around. But that's only because I was so damn close to being there. However, despite all the ups and downs, I can confidently say that I am happy with most of my life. If you look at it objectively, I have everything that once seemed unattainable. I make a ton of money, more than I ever dreamed of as a teenager playing football on the school field. I have a beautiful house, a real mansion with spacious rooms, high ceilings and windows through which the sun's rays pour in the morning. Home is my fortress, my refuge. It has everything I need for a comfortable life, including an office overlooking the garden where I sometimes sit and reflect on the past, and a swimming pool where I take a dip when I want to cool off. And of course, I have my wife, an amazing, smart, and caring woman who still looks at me with the same sparkle in her eyes that she looked at me on our wedding day. Her support is priceless to me. She is always there, despite all my ups and downs. Her love for me is sincere and devoted, and every day I am grateful that she chose me. In general, I live a life that many could only dream of. A good job, a wonderful family, stability and comfort, it would seem. What more could you want? But here's the problem. At 35 years old, I am at the peak of physical maturity in the prime of my life. I'm still tall, I'm still 6'4", and when I walk into a room, people still raise their heads to look at me. But with weight, the situation is completely different. Today, I weigh almost 400 pounds, which is much more than when I played football. My shoulders are still broad, my arms are strong, but my body is not what it used to be. My muscles once allowed me to race around the field ahead of my opponents, but now they are hidden under layers of fat that have accumulated over the years. I'm a walking candidate for a heart attack. My body is literally screaming that it is hard for it to cope with such a load. Every day I feel how this mass presses on my joints, my knees hurt, my breathing has become heavier, and any physical effort is difficult. And I realize it's only a matter of time before something happens. Doctors say straight out, if I don't change my life, if I don't start taking care of my health, the consequences will be catastrophic. I see it on their faces when they measure my blood pressure or study test results. And although on the outside I may appear as strong as ever, on the inside I feel like I'm on the edge. My wife Sarah has been putting pressure on me lately to do something about my weight. Mostly I just weekly tried to follow her suggestions. No fitness plan or diet plan worked, and I tried everything. Remember the Atkins diet, which many people lost weight on a few years ago. I basically gave up all carbs, but I still gained weight. Whatever the dietary requirements, I found a way around them. On the Atkins diet, I cut out all the carbs and simply replaced the calories with more meat. It got to the point where I was eating like a cow a day. I'd rather eat carbs. Not to mention, all that red meat caused my blood pressure to spike. And then, one night about 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Sarah and I had a very unpleasant incident about my weight during sex, and from that moment everything went wrong. We started arguing about my weight as usual, and she finally said that until I lost at least 50 pounds, we wouldn't have sex. I left the room and slammed the door. I spent that night in the guest bedroom and left for work early in the morning. I was hoping that when I got home, it would just be another fight that would blow over, but that wasn't the case. Sarah went online and found a weight loss camp program for me. The camp lasted a month, and she said it was probably the best thing for me. She's tired of being married to the fattest guy in the area. She was ashamed. I took a look at the brochure she had printed off the internet and called them. I immediately processed the payment and agreed to leave the next day. "Are you really going?" she asked. But I didn't tell her anything. I just went upstairs to collect my things. "It will be great if you lose weight. You will be healthier and you will feel better," she said. "The month will fly by. I will call you every day," she added. That night, I slept in the guest bedroom again. Sarah didn't understand why. "We're not angry at each other. It's all over. Why are you sleeping there again?" she asked. "You said we wouldn't sleep together until I lost 50 pounds, I reminded her. "I said we won't have sex until you get them off," she replied. "Besides, I didn't mean it. I was just angry." I think she realized that she had hurt me greatly and tried to make amends. But leaving home for a while still seemed like a good idea. The next morning, while Sarah was still sleeping, I got into my Chrysler 300C and drove to the airport. I flew to Tucson in the dry desert climate of Arizona to begin my program. My first 3 weeks here, I did my usual things when it came to fitness. I spent most of the first week setting up the internet and computer system so I could work remotely while at camp. The next week I started just observing what was happening around me. I say observe because I wasn't really involved in anything. I just watched and laughed at what we were asked to do. When it comes to food, let's be honest, I had internet access, so I used the dishes they served here as snacks, and then ordered pizza or burgers for delivery. The couriers already knew that if they met me on the access road along which the camp inmates were running, I would give a generous tip. I would sit at the picnic tables, eat my food, and head back to camp. So in 3 weeks here, how much have I lost? I lost -6 pounds. Yes, that means I'm 6 pounds fatter than I was when I arrived. That all changed 2 days ago when I received an email from old friend Steve Martin. Anyway, Steve had recently gone through a painful divorce and was getting his life back together. He was not looking for a new wife, but just wanted to have fun and unwind. Steve wrote that he was on a date at a club with a woman who was too young and too wild for us, and he thought he saw Sarah there with another man. He walked over to see if it was her. It really was her. She was with a guy he had never seen before, and she was letting him touch her. He took some photos because he knew I wouldn't believe him, or rather, I wouldn't want to believe it. I looked at the photos and realized he was right. It was Sarah. I recognized a unique necklace I made for her when we went to Mexico last year. This letter changed my entire purpose for being here, and it changed my life. I spent the next day reflecting on my life and deciding what I wanted to change. I was a really good guy. And like I said, I have a great life, but there were a few things that needed to change. Number one, I really had to do something about my weight and self-esteem. The other thing could wait until I dealt with the first one. In the morning, I went to the camp office and sat down with the director. I told him I needed to change my life, so I signed up for an intensive 6-month program they offer for people on the verge of morbid obesity. I started right away. This morning, I went for a walk in the desert with one of the training groups. It was an easy 2-mile walk at a slow pace. It was meant to speed up our metabolism and start burning calories before breakfast. I laughed at this because in high school and college, I ran about 4 miles a day at a good pace. This was my awakening. It made me realize how far I had sunk and that this was no longer school. I might have thought I was still that big, fit, athletic football player, but I wasn't. I struggled through those 2 miles and couldn't keep up the pace towards the end. A couple of 60-year-old women cheered me on and told me I was doing great as they passed me with half a mile to go. When I returned to camp, I was drenched in sweat and could barely walk. My knee, which I had injured playing football, was hurting again. As I entered the mess hall, many of the people I had become friends with at camp called out to me. They were shocked to see me covered in sweat. They were also scammers like me. I sat down at a small table in the corner by myself. If I was going to do what I was now determined to do, I didn't need any negative influences. For breakfast, I drank half a glass of orange juice, ate a piece of toast, half a cup of fresh fruit, and 2 slices of low-fat turkey bacon. I was still hungry when I finished, but I really decided to change. After breakfast, we had an hour of free time before the first seminar. I used that hour to hire a private investigator to gather information about Sarah for me. This was not what I wanted to do, and not what I was looking forward to. It was just something I had to do. I needed to know how far she went with this guy, and if there were others. I loved Sarah, and looking back, I think I can understand what she was going through. Depending on how far she went, we might have a chance to survive it. When I came to the seminar, this time I actually listened to the guest speakers. I heard stories of former camp inmates who lost significant weight and successfully kept the weight off. In some cases, they made big changes in their lives, and most claimed that it was because, after years of struggling with weight, they found one thing or one person or one event that gave them motivation and a reason to change. I realized that finding out that the woman I loved most in the world was cheating on me was my motivating event. But I changed not for her, but for myself. I always dated women in high school and college, and then I had Sarah, so I didn't have to look at myself. But the thought that I might lose her made me realize that I had to change something about myself. Almost immediately after I left the seminar, my phone rang. It was Sarah with her daily call. I haven't talked to her for the last 2 days since I talked to Steve because I was too hurt to even talk to her. "Hello, darling," she said cheerfully. "Where have you been? Why didn't you answer calls? I miss you so much." "Sarah, I'm trying to combine work from here and trying to lose weight. It's hard," I said. "Well, don't worry. You'll return home in 2 days and everything will be over," she said. "No, Sarah, I haven't lost 50 pounds. I won't return home until I lose at least 50, I answered seriously. "Carl, it was just a random number that I said when I was angry. I miss you." "I want you to come home," she said seriously. "I don't care if you only lost 2 pounds. I achieved what I wanted, and you really tried. If you really want to lose weight, now that you're serious, you can do it at home. No, Sarah, I answered just as seriously. A deal is a deal. I'm not going home until I've lost at least 50 pounds, maybe more. In my thoughts, I clung to her words that she achieved what she wanted. She probably should have said, whoever she wanted. Carl, don't be so stubborn. You can lose weight at home. Besides, I've been thinking about something and I really want you to come back, she said. Sarah, my decision is made, but I need you to do me a favor, I said. It's very difficult for me to lose weight without completely immersing myself in this lifestyle, so I don't want you to call me until I'm done. I'm doing this for both of us. I don't want you to be embarrassed by me anymore. Now I understand how hard it was for you to walk next to some disgusting fat man all this time, just because he loved you. Carl, I shouldn't have said that, she answered softly. I was just angry. I hung up and changed into sweatpants and a sweatshirt for our morning class. I went to the gym and looked around. I stood in the first row instead of the last. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Today's trainer was Debbie. She has always been a strict coach. She hasn't said a word to me since I came here. I saw her look at me with a grin a couple of times, but we never talked. Even now, when I stood in the front row, she looked at me as if she wanted to force me to retreat to the back row with her eyes so that she would not have to look at me. We started with a warm-up, stretching and bending. Not only could I not reach my toes, but I had trouble even reaching my knees. But I tried my best. Before we even finished the warm-up, we hadn't even started the actual exercises, and I was already covered in sweat. And then the humiliation began. We started with light knee lifts. They had to be raised supposedly to waist level. When we finished with them, I was covered in sweat, and Debbie looked at me with a mocking smile. We did arm raises, and she made us continue until I couldn't keep my arms up anymore, but I kept trying anyway. We lay down on the mat for even more humiliation. At one time, I could bench press over 300 pounds. I couldn't even do one push-up that day. I only managed to do one twist, but after that I collapsed. As I left, I saw Debbie grinning maliciously after me. I took a shower before lunch. After lunch, we had another hour of free time. I went to the infirmary to get my knee checked. I had a slight ligament tear, and it was bandaged. The morning walk put more stress on the muscles around the joint than they had experienced in a long time. The doctor said to apply ice for a couple of days and everything will be fine. I could continue to go for walks, but I shouldn't overdo it. That's how my next week went. I ate only the dishes that were served to us and refused desserts. I also skipped most snacks unless I was really hungry. The first 5 days were absolute hell. I knew that I was the butt of ridicule and jokes, and I deserved it after the first 3 weeks I spent here. But I was proud of myself. At the end of the first week that I really started working on myself, I had lost 8 pounds. Later that week, I received my first report from a private investigator. He had photographs for me. In some, Sarah was in a restaurant with that guy, and their conversation was even recorded. Of course, there were photographs of them entering the motel room, and it was obvious from the time they were there what they were doing. The funny thing is that the fact that she had sex with him hurt me less than what she said about me behind my back. The guy asked her what made her finally give him a chance after he had been wooing her for months. I never heard about this from her, so she hid a lot of things from me for a long time. It turned out that she had known this guy since her student days, but they had not met until recently. She told him she was tired and ashamed of me, that I was in such bad shape that I could no longer satisfy her, and so she sent me to the camp to try a real man. She then asked him how he hid what they were doing from his wife. He replied that, like her, he wears the pants in his family and his wife does what he says and doesn't ask questions. In the second week of real training, I increased the pace of my morning walks and started swimming or walking in the pool in the afternoon. I also started participating in some recreational activities such as archery and fencing. I needed to find new hobbies that would keep me busy after I left camp. I also hired a good divorce lawyer. I explained to him what was going on and how I discovered it all, and agreed that he would receive reports from a private investigator so that he would be aware of all developments. I asked him to prepare the documents for submission, although I did not yet have a specific end date for all this. By the end of the first month of real training, I was a new person, or at least closer to who I was. I lost almost 40 pounds and felt better than I had in years. My daily routine also changed. I woke up earlier and ran 3 miles instead of morning walks. I still went to Debbie's classes, but now it seemed like she no longer looked down on me and actually started smiling and greeting me in the morning. The biggest shock came one morning as I was completing the 10th push-up in a series of 15 when I suddenly felt extra weight on my back. I tried my best to do another push-up and looked up to see Debbie pressing down on my back, adding resistance. I was able to handle my work responsibilities while staying at camp via the internet, email, and phone. I also made a list of friends and acquaintances, and during my daily meditations, instead of motivating myself to lose weight, I reflected on my relationships with most of the people I knew. I realized that for a long time, many of them did not laugh with me about my weight, but laughed at me. By week 6, my weight had finally reached a plateau. The weight continued to come off, but much more slowly. I lost a little over 60 pounds, but could no longer maintain my previous rate of about 1 pound a day. I remembered how in school my coach would give us 2 training sessions a day if someone showed up to pre-season training in bad shape. So I added a second, longer run to my schedule. This run was more challenging, and although my knee and age would never allow me to run like I did in college again, I enjoyed it and tried to run a little more each day. Sometimes, if I still had energy, I would go to the gym and lift weights. Again, I did this carefully, relying on my memory of what I did when I was younger to guide me through the exercises. At first, it was humiliating. After years of talking about how I benched 300 pounds, I had a hard time benching 100 pounds. Another shock to me was that as I made progress, the results were inconsistent. I raised my bench to 150 pounds and then couldn't lift it again for over a week. My legs were also very weak. The knee injuries simply prevented me from doing squats or other heavy leg exercises. The same thing happened with many back exercises. Any exercise that required standing was limited by weakness in the knee joint, but I slowly got better. However, the pain in my heart did not go away. One night I was trying to lift 170 pounds and the first set was pretty easy. I had a hard time getting through the second one. Common sense should have told me not to attempt the third approach, but in my emotional state common sense was not my strong suit. On the way back, the barbell became much heavier, and I simply could not lift it. I was struggling, trying to figure out how to wriggle out from under the barbell, when suddenly I felt someone grab it and help me lift it. Together, we returned the bar to the rack. "That was smart, Carl," Debbie said. "You had difficulty completing the second approach. What made you think that you could complete another one? Did you even know that according to camp rules you can't be in the gym alone? Now do you understand why?" "I'm sorry, Debbie, it won't happen again," I said. "Thank you for saving me. I know this is another reason for you to laugh at me, so you can tell everyone how you had to help that fat loser again." After that, I left. If Debbie had any other comments or criticisms, she withheld them and simply let me go. The next morning after breakfast, I started looking around the training halls to see if there was another group I could join. There was a yoga group and a Pilates group that I had never tried, but I decided to try step aerobics. It looked like fun. There were a lot of women and few men in the class. I was about to enter when I suddenly heard a voice behind me. "I'll be very upset if you go there, Carl," she said. I turned around and saw Debbie standing behind me. She, as usual, was dressed for classes and looked at me intently. "Why don't you come to my class today like you always do? And after the lesson, I would like to talk to you. Tomorrow you can do whatever you want, okay?" She extended her small hand, and I nodded, took her hand, and walked with her. We went back to Debbie's training room and ran her session. "Take a shower and meet me here," she said. Half an hour later, I stood in front of the hall, waiting for Debbie to return. I didn't know what was on her mind. She was most likely going to reprimand me again for training alone and violating camp safety rules, which could lead to expulsion. Surely she was going to say that she was obliged to inform the camp director about this. Whatever it was, nothing could have made me worse than the news I received this morning. My detective told me that Sarah brought the guy she was dating to my house last night, and he stayed the night. I was still considering what to do with Sarah when Debbie appeared and instantly erased her from my thoughts. Debbie, despite her drill sergeant demeanor, was very petite. She was about 5'1" tall and weighed about 120 pounds wet. She had jet black hair and gray eyes. Her hair reached the middle of her shoulder blades and lived a life of its own. Often, when she performed any exercise, her hair would fly behind her or form a curtain to hide her face. My favorite sight is when she turns and looks at the class over her shoulder and her hair covers one side of her face so that only one of those beautiful, piercing gray eyes is visible. It's like that look penetrates your soul, testing you to see if you can do that one more rep you didn't even know you could do. Her breasts, while not huge, were noticeable enough to dictate what kind of clothing she could wear. It was because of her that so many men went to Debbie's classes. Her classes were difficult, but most guys preferred them to easier classes just to watch her. As for her butt, that's a different story. It's difficult to describe her because the only words that come to mind are ideal or appetizing. She was not big, but very toned, firm, and round. So elastic that I'm sure you could knock a coin off of it. Debbie was rumored to love women, but her classes were always overcrowded. When Debbie showed up in a loose sweatshirt and mid-calf jeans, I was surprised. I had never seen her in ordinary clothes before. It seems that in my mind she was born in tights. Her hair was pinned up on top of her head and huge sunglasses hid her incredible eyes. This outfit on the average woman would be appropriate for a shopping trip or for running errands or gardening on a lazy Saturday. With Debbie, he opened up a whole new world of fantasy. He made her more human, perhaps even vulnerable. She smiled at me and nodded towards the exit. This confused me because I thought we were going to talk. Debbie, I began. Relax, Carl. You are not in trouble, and you won't be in trouble. I just wanted to talk, she began. Usually, when I need to collect my thoughts, I get into my Jeep and drive into the desert. It helps clear your head and makes everything better. Usually, when I return, I either find a solution to my problem, or it no longer seems as serious as it was before. Maybe it's just a stress reliever, or maybe it puts things into perspective, but it seems to work. And Carl, whether you like it or not, you have become a problem for me. My heart sank at these words. It's great, now I'm a problem for her. Damn, I have enough problems of my own to even worry about some woman hating me. She led me out the back entrance into the employee parking lot and to a black Jeep Wrangler. For some reason, I expected it to be a pink, real version of Barbie's dream Jeep. It would have suited her appearance and size, but perhaps a black Wrangler reflected her personality better. I got into the car and held on tighter, as it immediately moved off as soon as the door was closed. We drove along the highway for a while, and then she turned sharply onto an unpaved road that I would not have noticed it was not marked. We rushed through trees and bushes, which became increasingly rarer as we progressed, until suddenly it turned out that there was no more vegetation, and we found ourselves in the desert. The dry, sandy land stretched before us all the way to the mountains on the horizon. Debbie put the Jeep into four-wheel drive and slowed down a bit as we began to navigate the uneven, still paved surface. She clearly knew where she was going, so I just held on tight. Finally, we reached the edge of a medium-sized canyon, and Debbie, in an apparently practiced move, drove right up to the edge. Just a couple more feet, and we would have been hanging over the abyss. She pulled the handbrake, got out, and walked to a large rock overlooking the canyon, where she sat down. She looked at the huge crack in the ground and seemed to relax, as if collecting her thoughts. Then she turned to me and looked at me as if she were looking at a bug on the windshield. Carl, what's happening to you? She asked, bringing me out of my stupor. When you first came here, you were just another fat, spoiled rich boy who didn't take this place seriously, so I didn't take you seriously either. You made your conference calls, ordered pizza for the night, and hung out with the same clowns. We see hundreds of these guys every year. You come here overweight and in bad shape, and if you're lucky, you lose 4 or 5 pounds, and then you go home and tell everyone how hard it was. Some of them make a ritual out of it and come every year," she said with a jab. Her eyes softened and her tone became less harsh. She even came closer to where I was sitting. "But then something happened and you changed. I don't know what it was, but you became different. On the first day, when you came to my class and stood right in front, I was sure that you would not last even 10 minutes. In fact, I tried to get rid of you, but you gave it your all. You left covered in sweat, and I was sure that this impulse would quickly fade, but it intrigued me. Over the past few weeks, I have watched you go through an incredible transformation. Not only have you lost a huge amount of weight, you've gotten into great shape. Now you have almost no excess weight. You don't even look like the person who came here." It was something I didn't expect, a backhanded compliment of sorts, and coming from Debbie, it was a shock. "You probably don't know this, but when these changes started happening, I changed too," she said. "I went from believing you couldn't handle it to becoming your biggest cheerleader. I watched as you began your nightly runs through the desert. I also saw you start lifting weights at night. That's why I was there that night when you overdid it. Most people who lost half your weight, without even getting into the shape you are now, would be pleased with themselves and happy. They would become more confident and proud of themselves. At the ceremony next month before camp closes for the season, you will receive several awards, but don't tell anyone I told you so. But you don't look happy. It's like it's the other way around for you. Most people come here sad and depressed because they're overweight and people tease them for it or something. They lose weight, become happier, and return home more confident. You were happy when you arrived, maybe a little angry, but confident and calm. You worked like hell and made more progress than anyone I can remember. You look amazing, but you have become so sad and withdrawn that it makes me sad too. You used to sit at the end of the hall and laugh with those clowns and be happy. Now you inspire other campers and staff, but you run off and work even harder on your own." Debbie paused and continued. "Carl, I know what people here think of me. I've heard all my nicknames, and I don't care. For me, it's just a job. My job is to help people find the strength to change their weight and health. No more, but no less. I push them to change, lead by example, and help them train. Some people understand this, others don't, but for me, it's not personal, it's just work. But somewhere over these few months, you became more than just a job for me. You have become something personal to me. That's why I snapped at you that night. When I saw the bar fall on you, I was scared to death. I thought you might have gotten seriously hurt or worse, and in the back of my mind, I thought maybe you wanted this." I looked at her and saw tears running down her cheeks. I was shocked. I hugged her. She clearly needed to talk, and I just listened. She told me about her life, and it was not at all what I expected. She started doing gymnastics, but she didn't have the typical tight, muscular body that most gymnasts have, so she was more likely to get injured. There were also drugs that many girls took to delay breast development and hip expansion. She did not take them and soon began to lose ground because no matter how hard she trained, she could not compete with those who were on drugs. After some time, she decided to just quit everything, which was a very difficult decision for her, but she switched to another sport. She was always beautiful, so she decided to try herself in fitness competitions. It wasn't quite like bodybuilding, but close to it. However, the emphasis was on femininity and grace rather than on muscle and size. She succeeded, but again drugs and even something worse came to the fore. In many cases, women who won competitions and received contracts were actually providing extra services to judges and sponsors. Men always paid attention to her, even when she did gymnastics, but here it was almost expected. After several attempts were made to force her without her consent, and she was only saved by security, she also left the sport. She earned degrees in exercise physiology and kinesiology and began a career as a personal trainer. She has worked at this camp for the past 6 years. After that, I felt closer to her than I had felt to anyone in a long time. So I told her why I came to the camp. I told her about my wife, Sarah, and how she didn't care about my health at all. I told her that Sarah was just ashamed of me and wanted to send me away so she could cheat on me behind my back with someone in better shape. Well, now she won't be ashamed of you, Debbie said. The next time she sees you, she'll be crazy about you. No, the next time she sees me, it will be in divorce court, I replied. I kept trying to look at everything from her point of view. I had to admit that I had really let myself down, and she was absolutely right to want me to be in better shape. But the way she did it and the things she said about me really hurt me and made me wonder if she really cared about me. But betrayal was the last straw. This was decisive for me. Perhaps there are other things I could come to terms with over time, but I can never trust her again. That night changed a lot. From then on, I still attended Debbie's classes every day, but she pushed me even more. A lot of guys were jealous as hell when I did push-ups with Debbie on my back. She even sometimes ran with me at night. We never went beyond friendship, but sometimes when she looked at me a certain way, I got goosebumps. Meanwhile, at home the situation was heating up. According to information from a private investigation agency, Sarah has ended her relationship with her old college friend. Apparently, he was only interested in intimacy with her and my money. He practically lived in my house, spending several days a week there, and even his wife began to complain. The last straw was when he and Sarah began to quarrel. She tried to end this relationship since the dirty component and novelty for her lost interest, but he did not want to let her go. She started calling me again to find out when I would arrive. She left me messages about how much she missed me and how much she loved me. Since the camp was supposed to close in a month, I knew that I would have to return home soon. Debbie and I went shopping because I needed new clothes. After losing almost 140 pounds, none of my old clothes fit. While I was in the store, I saw something I had always dreamed of but could never afford. A bright red 2009 Mustang GT parked in a parking lot across from a shopping center. I went to the parking lot and began to examine the car. The door was open and I got behind the wheel. I was shocked. Over 100 pounds ago, I could barely fit into my old Chrysler. And now I could easily get in and out of the car, which I simply adored. I found a seller and started filling out the paperwork. As soon as they checked my credit history and I transferred money from my account, I drove off the site in my new toy. Debbie followed me in her Jeep back to camp. I made a few calls to my private investigator and lawyer, and then called Sarah to tell her that the camp was ending that weekend, and there would be a ceremony for the families and friends of the participants. She said she would come and seemed excited to see me again. Don't flatter yourself too much, I said. This day may not be such a happy day for you. Carl, over the past few months, I have realized that appearance is not the main thing, she asserted. It's much more important to be with someone who loves and supports you, no matter how much he weighs or what he looks like. So even if you've only lost 1 damn pound, it's time to go home so we can get on with our lives. I love you and miss you. I've had a lot of time to figure out what I really want and need in life. I miss my big, strong husband, Teddy. Over the next few days, I took several more significant steps to change my life and my work. Some of the things I did I kept a secret even from Debbie. As for Debbie, she began to noticeably need communication and became more dependent on me as the ceremony approached. The night before the ceremony, we had dinner so I could thank her for all the help and inspiration she had given me. She even held my hand for a while we talked. Looks like our time is running out, she said. Tomorrow your wife will come to the ceremony, and you can return to Ohio and either put her in her place or divorce her. Yes, I said quietly. I think I missed the sad note in her voice because my thoughts were elsewhere. We drove back to camp in silence, accompanied by the roar of the Mustang's engine. There was a lot left unsaid between Debbie and me. I know that you were too honest a person to even think about any relationship while you were still married, she began. But is there a chance that you have already decided whether you will return her? I guess I just want to ask, is there a chance that one day someone will send me a plane ticket to Ohio? Debbie, we've always been honest with each other, I said, and you may not know, but I have very deep feelings for you, so I'm not going to start lying now. There will be no plane tickets to Ohio or anywhere else. She nodded, and I didn't see her until the ceremony. The next day I felt strange. I got up early in the morning and went for a run alone. For most campers, weeks or months of training and dieting were behind them. But for me, running had become a part of me, so just because I didn't have to do it anymore, I wasn't going to miss a workout. After my run, I tried to find Debbie, but she was nowhere to be found. A couple of employees said she was sitting in her room and not feeling well. I also heard that Sarah was looking everywhere for me. As a joke, I went into the classroom and tried to find her. I walked past her, but she didn't recognize me. When the ceremony began, everyone gathered in the hall. I had a special moment when I saw Debbie standing next to Sarah. I got the opportunity to compare them, but it was like comparing apples and oranges. Sarah has short blonde hair and a tall, slender silhouette. She's not nearly as athletic as Debbie, but she's still slim and attractive. Debbie, on the other hand, had simply stunning beauty, although she was shorter. She was talking to someone, obviously about me, and Sarah heard it, lost her temper, and walked away from the table. She sat further away, and when I looked at her and smiled, she turned away. I laughed. It clearly seemed to her that I was some kind of stranger who was hitting on her. For the past 6 months, she had been dating and sleeping with Thomas Hill, her old married college boyfriend. She brought him to my house and had sex with him in my bed, but now she was too pure to allow herself a smile from some stranger. During the ceremony, every time she heard my name, she turned around, trying to see me. And finally, I was invited to the stage to present the awards to me. I received one award for the most weight loss in 1 month, another for the greatest overall result, and the last one for being the most inspiring camper because I showed up in terrible shape, but not only lost a significant amount of weight, but improved his physical fitness and lifestyle, becoming an inspiring example to everyone around him. As I spoke and looked out at the audience, I noticed Sarah sitting on the edge of her chair. She was clearly shocked by my appearance. She couldn't believe it was her fat husband standing on stage. I was asked to say a few words, and I began to say, "It's very easy to fall into the trap of eating too much and doing too little," I began. "It's much more difficult to get out of this trap. In most cases, we go so deep into it that we can no longer get out on our own, and we need someone who will help us, inspire us, or simply push us out of the hole in which we have fallen. Much has been said today about my weight loss and progress in getting fitter. Less was said about how my spirit was lifted, and without that, nothing else would have made sense. Behind all these changes is one woman who has been the catalyst for all these changes. She stood on the side of the road while I ran, fasted, and lifted weights. Maybe she wasn't always there when I ran. Maybe I wasn't always there when I lifted weights. But when I fell, she was always there to pick me up. "Come here so everyone can see you." And I paused for a moment, giving Sarah the opportunity to stand up and take a step towards the stage before I said, "Debbie." Everyone in the audience and on stage responded with thunderous applause as Debbie stood up and walked onto the stage to join me. If looks could kill, the look Sarah gave Debbie would have been lethal. Debbie shook my hand and I hugged her for a few photos. The director then made a few closing remarks and everyone headed off to the dinner that followed the ceremony. A few minutes later, when almost everyone had left the room, Sarah ran towards me and Debbie with rage. "Now it's clear why you didn't want to return home for so long," she shouted. "You just wanted to betray me with this woman of easy virtue while I was sitting and waiting for you at home." "Sarah, at this point Debbie and I are just friends," I said. "We never had sex, we never slept together, we never even kissed. So before you start embarrassing yourself, you better shut up." "Sorry, honey," Sarah said. "You just look so good. You are so slim and completely different. I was just jealous. And I was alone in that house for so long. I was so lonely while I was waiting for you. I can't wait for you to come home so I can experience the new you." "So were you lonely?" I asked. In response, she nodded vigorously. "Who is this then?" I asked, showing her an 8x10 photo of her sitting in a restaurant with Thomas Hill. He's just an old friend from college that I ran into by chance. He's a nobody, she said. He's somebody, I said sharply. He's the reason we're getting a divorce, Sarah. I know everything about him. I know that you started dating him before I left. I know being with him is the real reason you wanted me to go to camp. I know you were just ashamed to be with your fat husband who loved you with all his heart and soul. But at the same time you wanted to have sex with someone who looks better and can satisfy you. Yes, I even have a recording of you saying this, so don't try to lie. I also know and have photographs of you bringing him to my house. This was truly my home, Sarah. You never worked, so your name wasn't even on the mortgage. And in my house, you had sex with him in my bed, Sarah, so there's nothing more to say. As I turned to leave, I noticed my lawyer handing her the divorce papers. But Carl, can't we discuss this? It was just a hobby, a mistake. I ended it all myself because I really missed you. Once the newness wore off, I realized that I really love you, and you love me, and we have more in common than with anyone else. The only thing I didn't like about you was all that fat, but it's gone. Well, Sarah, I also came to my conclusions. I realized that I didn't want to be married to someone who was ashamed of me. The interest in being with you disappeared as soon as I heard all those things you said about me. You're right about one thing, I continued. We really have a lot in common. You were ashamed to be around your fat husband, so you sent me away. And I'm ashamed to be with a woman who behaves like a woman of easy virtue, so get out of here. We can overcome this, she said quietly. Just come home, we'll talk, we'll go through family therapy. We have too much in common to throw it all away. Everything has already been decided, I said slowly. We live in a state with community property laws. In most cases, even if I can prove you are unfaithful, the judge will still award a 50-50 division of property. We don't have children, so there's nothing to argue about. Our home makes up 70% of our total wealth. I'm giving it to you. This means that you get more than what the court would have awarded you. Of course, since you don't have a job and never have, you'll have to sell it. You can't pay property taxes in this area without my income. And given the state of the real estate market, you won't get anywhere near its appraised value. Moreover, you probably won't be able to sell it. I smiled at her mockingly. If you start demanding alimony, I will destroy you. I will make our situation public and send copies of photographs and videos to all your friends and relatives. Just walk away and we'll both come out of this whole thing. Her mouth opened in surprise and she began to cry. Sarah, I hope you have cash on you because right before the ceremony, I canceled all your credit cards and closed all our joint accounts. At least you're doing better than me because I don't have a home at all right now, I said. But where will you live? Why don't you stay with me and give me a chance to make things right? She screamed, realizing that she would no longer be able to live as she was used to without my income. You haven't cared about me since you started cheating, so I don't know why you care now. But I will never be able to cross the threshold of this house again. That's why I left it for you. I moved my office here to Arizona and am buying a house here. I'm starting my life from scratch with a man who won't be ashamed of me. Sarah, I lost over 140 pounds while I was here, and the people here are proud of it. But you lost a husband who would have loved you forever, a beautiful home and a family that we could have created. All this because you could not be a faithful wife to me. My weight was just an excuse for your affair. So if you ask me, you are a true champion. You're the biggest loser, I said, and just walked away, leaving her standing there. I got into my Mustang and drove away. Since then, I have not had any contact with her, except through communication through our lawyers. I did receive one call from her father, however, who told her how unhappy she was and asked if I would consider moving back to Ohio, at least for a while, to calm the situation. I had to tell him all the details of our breakup and what she did. I told him that if he wanted proof, I could send him photographs, audio recordings, and even videos. He just wished me a good life, and I followed his advice. Debbie and I are happy. We traveled to Ohio several times on business, and all my friends and colleagues were shocked by the changes in my life and appearance. They all adore Debbie and often say that I did the right thing. Things aren't going so well for Sarah. She has gained a lot of weight and cannot lose weight. She sold the house for half its value and moved to a smaller one. Then she quickly spent most of the money. As a result, she had to move in with her parents and get a job at a convenience store. It's hard for her to work. She is not eating properly and is gaining more and more weight. She is so ashamed of her appearance that she rarely leaves the house. I sent her a brochure for the fitness camp I attended. I really didn't want to hurt her. I sincerely tried to help. Since she couldn't afford the camp, Debbie and I offered to pay for it for her and even let her stay with us while she was there. We are so happy that we wanted to share this happiness with her. After all, if it weren't for Sarah being ashamed of me, Debbie and I would never have met. Unfortunately, Sarah refused. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.